If you're taking APCSA this year and you don't know about the recent changes, you need to know. These changes will affect your score, and not knowing about them will probably cause you to waste time. But I've got you covered. We're going to go over those changes in this video, and I'll finish with two key questions. Is the exam harder or easier now? And is old study material now useless? The first change is that inheritance is no longer on the test. And if you don't know what inheritance is, that's perfectly fine. It's not on the test anymore. You don't have to know it. Now, I will show you some code in a second, in case you're curious, but this is generally a good change. A lot of students had trouble with the inheritance questions. Even some of my top students, who had years of coding experience, could stumble on the inheritance questions. Now they're not there anymore, and you have one less thing to worry about. And here's a quick peek at what inheritance looks like in Java if you're curious. Inheritance is still a great thing to learn if you're serious about coding, but you don't need to know it for APCSA, and you don't need to understand what this code means, but do keep an eye on this word, extends. We'll come back to this later in the video. The second big change to APCSA for this year is that there's now material on how to read text files in Java. Now, this is not a change that's going to make the test any easier, but it is a change I very much like. Reading a text file is a central skill for a programmer, and when I started to teach this material, I was shocked that they didn't have a unit on how to read text files. It's 100% something any programmer should know. So this code reads in a file in Java and prints out each line. And you might be thinking, that looks complicated. And you're not wrong. This is more complicated and a bit more of a headache than it is in many other programming languages, but this is what we're working with. I will release a video later going over the details of what you need to know about reading files in Java for the APCSA exam, so like and subscribe if you're interested in getting that content. But one thing to keep an eye on for now is right here, we have file and scanner. There's different ways to read files in Java. If you look this up online or if you use ChatGPT for it, you may see something else, you probably will see something else, but that's not how they want you to do it on the AP exam. They want you to use file and scanner, so be aware of that. The third big change to APCSA is that there used to be 10 units in the course, according to the official document on the College Board website. Now we're down to 4 units. Wow, that's a huge change. Half the material's gone. Actually, no. They didn't really remove that much material. They only cut the unit on inheritance, and then they kind of merged the other units into 4 big units. So this is how they've rearranged the units. I've got here a side-by-side comparison of the official course guides from College Board that tell you how the units are arranged. And on the left, what you'll see is the old units, and on the right is the new units that they're going to be using from 2026 and on. And what you'll see is that they've just kind of moved things around. So for example, here in Unit 2, we've got objects, instances of classes, and they've moved that down into Unit 1, right? Whatever. Unit 1 is just bigger now. It doesn't make that much of a difference. Or another example, here we've got while loops in Unit 4, and those have been moved into Unit 2. Okay, so who cares? Well, this isn't that big of a change. You're still learning the same material, and you may find things in older books or in different units or in different places, different orders, and so on, so just be aware of that. The fourth change, and this is a smaller change, is that question 3 on the free response section used to be about either arrays or array lists. It is now guaranteed to be about array lists and not arrays. Okay, so that's great. You get to skip studying arrays. No, it's not great. You don't get to skip studying arrays. Understanding arrays and array algorithms is still important on other parts of the test, and it is a central skill for any programmer. So you still have to spend lots of time studying arrays, but this one question, you do know it'll always be about array lists. As I said, this is a smaller change. The fifth change to APCSA is about scoring. So there's 2 sections on APCSA, and these 2 sections used to have equal weight. They both counted for 50% of the total score. That is not the case anymore. So here we've got a screenshot from the official website detailing these scoring changes, and what you'll see is that your multiple choice section is now worth 55%, which means the free response section is now worth less, 45%. And they've also added 2 questions. It used to be 40, now it is 42. But whatever, that's not that big of a deal. A more interesting change is that they have gone from 5 answer choices to 4. This has 2 effects. It makes it slightly easier to just randomly guess the correct answer. And if you're using process of elimination to get rid of, say, 2 answers, you now have a 50-50 chance of guessing correctly after eliminating some. Before, with 5 answer choices, you eliminate 2, it's only 33%, and so on for other cases of eliminating answers. Now that leads into a question you probably want to know the answer to if you're watching a video like this, which is, with these changes, is APCSA now easier or harder? And I would say it seems like it's going to be easier. Why? Well, 4 choices are very slightly better than 5. Now, that does not mean that every student's going to get a higher score because of that. What that means is that if you look at the global average of all the thousands of scores across APCSA, that small change should raise the global average very, very slightly. But don't count on that. A more important change for most students is that the multiple choice section now counts for more. And for most students, not everybody, this is good. What I've seen is that students with a lot of prior coding experience, not in Java, can do better on the free response section than they do on MCQs. But that's a minority, and so it is better for most students to have that be slightly heavier. And finally, the test is slightly easier because of what I mentioned at the start of the video, which is that inheritance is not on there anymore. That was a tricky concept. No more tricky questions about that are taking points away from people. Now, why is the word seems in red here? Because we don't know, right? College Board does not release information like what percentage did you need on this year to get a 5 on the test. They don't tell people that. They give you how many students took it and the percentage who scored a 5 and a 4 and so on. They don't say how much did you have to get right on a given year to get that score. And so what they could do is, if people are scoring slightly higher, they just raise the cutoff for a 5, raise the cutoff for a 4, and so on, which means even though the questions are slightly easier, it's not necessarily any easier to get a 5, and they could also just write harder questions. We don't know, this is all speculation. Now, having said all that, APCSA is still a very doable test. With a lot of practice and the right guidance, I do think anybody can get a 4 and most students can get a 5. But if you're worried about this, I do offer tutoring. Check my link in the description. I've already helped many students get 5s and do their best on the exam. So that brings us to the final question. Is old APCSA study material now useless? No, absolutely not. It's still extremely useful. Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the difference between people who reliably make the scores they want on exams and people who make mediocre scores? The difference is practice. And what are you going to use to practice? You're going to use old exams. However, that puts you in a bit of a quandary. Why? Well, those old exams contain questions about inheritance, which got removed. I have told you you don't need to know inheritance for this course anymore. So how are you going to recognize which questions are about that concept without having to learn that concept? Seems like a bit of a pickle, but I've got you covered. We're going to look at key terms that show up in inheritance questions, and these terms are dead giveaways that you can skip that question if you're just worried about preparing for the exam. So on the practice exams, a lot of the questions have code samples. And if you're looking at a code sample and you see this word extends in the code, that's a dead giveaway. That's an inheritance question. Inheritance is literally what the word extends does in Java. Now, if you're really looking at much older tests, you may also run into the words interface and implements. Those have been long gone, but if you're looking at 10-year-old, 15-year-old tests, they may crop up. You don't need to do those questions either. There's also a lot of vocab questions or conceptual questions about inheritance, so you may notice words like parent class, child class, superclass, subclass, and overrides. These are all basically inheritance questions. If you see these on an old test and you're just prepping for APCSA in 2026 or later, go ahead and skip those. And I say probably polymorphism. Polymorphism comes in different forms. Some forms of it are related to inheritance, but I did a Control F for the most recent course guide on College Board that's over 200 pages long. The word polymorphism has disappeared from the most recent one, and it does appear multiple times in the previous one, so that to me means they're probably not asking about this anymore, but they could. They did not officially release a statement saying polymorphism is off the test. My name is John. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science, and I'm a certified teacher. I'd be happy to help you maximize your score, and I also teach DSA at the college level. check my link for my tutoring services. I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching.